Hey there, it's Rachel Mullins, the host of Hashtag No Filter Fridays on Public House Media.
Disarming disability.
Okay, so here we are. Welcome back. This is our first episode of the season. We're really excited that you're here. And so, we've got really awesome experts for this chapter. But let's also address the reality of the world that we're living in right now. So COVID-19 is real. I know that all of us are sort of and we're sort of in the thick of it. We've been in this for what, 2 months, maybe like a month and a half now at this point, sort of around there. Definitely too long, but also sort of like not long enough. But I know all of our lives are completely disrupted.
What has your life looked like? What has COVID done in your world?
In my world personally, everything has stopped. So I took a leave from the airline, so I will not be working for American Airlines for the next year. I come back in 2021, sort of depending on what life looks like. When things were really sort of coming out in early March, it was really sort of startling to see that flight loads were, maxed out. Like, this is airplanes that I work typically hold like 187 people, right? That's like an Airbus 321. It holds maybe about that many people. We have a couple of different configurations. But then to just watch how the numbers were dropping hour by hour, like I would be able to sort of track my flights. And a flight that I was supposed to work, but then for whatever reasons didn't work, it went out with like 20 people on it. And that's nothing I've ever seen in my lifetime. I know a lot of flight attendants sort of speak that this is the world that sort of existed in post 9/11. So just as the COVID was beginning and they were starting to offer these leaves because routes were like canceling, people were, not filling those seats and trying to reschedule or get money back. I was like, okay, like this could really be a good space for me to get an occupational therapy job since I just graduated. I just got my license on March 3rd. So I was really excited to be able to practice OT. So I was like, okay, I think I'll be fine because I have another job that I can go to where that may necessarily, maybe not the same story that every other flight attendant has, right? So, and then just as that switch happened, things got pretty ramped up with COVID and then everything's frozen, right? So I applied to all 7 occupational therapy jobs in the greater Philadelphia area. So maybe I'll get one, I don't know. So everything is just kind of frozen. I also, just before COVID had started, I had abstracts accepted to be presenting at different conferences around aerial arts and disability and limb differences. I had different presentations. We had a workshop that we were going to do, and some of these things started being paid. So it just was really exciting for my own life to be like, okay, this sort of alternative lifestyle in advocacy and speaking and presenting and sort of continuing research was really starting to get amped up. I was going to do a performance with Aaron Ball in Guadalajara for the aerial arts, which was super excited. And again, these being paid things. And then sort of COVID has just canceled my life. So I'm in sort of this funky space where I am applying for unemployment and sort of okay, so I'm this flight attendant with a graduate degree that's unemployed. Was okay, Sarah, great life decisions you did. So that is me, unemployed flight attendant with the graduate degree. Hey.
I feel you, and it's not just you. I mean, in my company, I initially also was furloughed, and so I also was a unemployed person with a graduate degree. My company they got the small business loan that the government is offering. So now I've been trying to figure out how to get off unemployment, which by the way is just as hard as trying to get on unemployment. But I'm just hoping that the good that will come out of this craziness that we're in right now are the things exactly like what we're talking about, where working from home can be more normal if that's an accommodation that somebody needs. But yeah, I'm really excited now to jump into today's guest. This guest reached out, his team, I guess, reached out to us, and we totally freaked out when they reached out to us, because this person, Jay Ruderman, is our guest today. And Jay runs a family foundation called the Ruderman Foundation, and they do so much amazing activism within the disability space. And just to have the chance to be able to pick the brain of somebody who has not only the resources of money, but also the resources of people and of influence, to talk about the ways and the thought process of how you go through that and what you do was so cool. And he just was, Jay, I mean, as you'll hear, he's just the most intelligent guy who totally gets it, right? He gets disability. He gets where the gaps are, and he is actively working to fill these gaps. So we are just so honored and so excited to jump into this interview and have you join the amazing conversation we had with expert Jay Ruderman.
Jay Ruderman is the president of the Ruderman Family Foundation, which focuses on the inclusion of people with disabilities worldwide and educating Israeli leaders on the American Jewish community. Jay graduated from Boston University with honors and received his JD from Boston University School of Law. He lives in Boston with his wife and their 4 children. For Jay's full bio, please check out our website at disarmingdisability.com.
Welcome, Jay.
We
talked about it a little bit before, but can you give us a little taste of what Boston is like during this pandemic time?
Yeah, so Boston is an epicenter of COVID-19. There's a lot of cases here. I mean, we're not in the situation of New York, but we are in the midst of the surge. People are locked down. We just got a notice from the Commonwealth that we're locked down until pretty much the end of May. Our kids are out of school for the rest of the year. It's a serious situation, but people still go about their lives. Most people are working from home, those that can work from home. But of course, we rely on our first responders, our doctors, our nurses, police officers, and so forth, and the people who are in our supermarkets. So there's a lot of people that can't work from home. But we're trying to stay safe, and most people I see out and about walking around are following precautions, wearing masks and keeping social distancing. So we're sort of in the midst of it.
Yeah, that's how it feels here in Chicago too. It's been strange in a matter of weeks that, one time a week I go grocery shopping. The first time it was shocking to see someone in a mask. And now here, just 2 or 3 weeks later, it's shocking to see someone without a mask. And that's just been such a strange turn. But we're all in this together. And I'm glad that you are, staying safe, and that it sounds like everyone is well.
Thank you.
So let's hop right in. I'm wondering if you can give us a little bit of history on you. What does your career look like, and how have you come to the place that you're in today?
Well, I'm a Bostonian. I grew up here, went to college at a local school at Brandeis University, and I went to Boston University Law School. I used to be an assistant district attorney, but I've always been involved in politics and activism, and I've always believed in activism as a way to change society. And when I took over running the foundation's about 2 decades old, but I've been involved for about 10 or 12 years. And I sort of took it from a philanthropic organization, which we still are, into a combination of a philanthropic organization, but also we do a lot of advocacy. And our advocacy started by responding to stories of celebrities and politicians, films and movies in which people with disabilities were portrayed or spoken about in derogatory terms, to actually putting out over a dozen white papers dealing with a lot of different subjects on disability. And we're still very outspoken. I mean, I think one of the things, Family Foundation, for those that aren't familiar, is the government allows families to put a certain amount of wealth aside and to distribute that for the public benefit to public charities. But we have a great deal of latitude. And one of the things that I think allows us to be really good in advocacy is we don't have a lot of bureaucracy. So we can respond within a matter of hours. And we work a lot with the media, social media, but also traditional media.
That's fantastic. I really, when I was looking through the Ruderman Family Foundation website, I came across those white papers. And I know that Nikki and I spoke, we had Lawrence Cutter-Long on our podcast the first season that spoke specifically about this study that was conducted researching films from 2007 to 2015. And so I kept thinking like, okay, so what's happening now? Like what growth has happened between 2015 to 2020? So when I came across those white papers, I was like, wow, this is one that's coming out every year that's looking at, how has things changed within our TV shows and things like that. So I got really excited because it really is. So thank you for continuing on that research, because it is really important to see who is still not being represented.
Right. And Lawrence is great. He and David Perry actually wrote our first white paper, which was on police brutality, and that half of the people that are killed by police officers have a disability, and often that disability is not portrayed in the media as part of the conversation.
Yeah.
Regarding Hollywood, we've done 3 white papers. We've been extremely involved in Hollywood for the past few years, actually until COVID-19 hit, about authentic representation of people with disabilities. Mm-hmm. And our first white paper, which was done, one of the authors is Danny Woodburn, who is a little person and probably best known for a recurring role on Seinfeld, but he's been in many movies and TV shows. But the first white paper said that 95% of the people that you see on TV on the leading shows are played by able-bodied characters. Mm-hmm. And there has been some progress. I mean, we've been very outspoken about films in which disability is portrayed by able-bodied actors. And, you think about like why this is important. Well, stigma is prevalent in our society. And before COVID-19 hit, we had the lowest unemployment in the history of the United States. We had about under 4% unemployment. But people with disabilities were still unemployed at the rate of 70%. And a lot of that has to do with stigma. The thing about TV and film, Michelle Obama once said that most of us get to know people who are not like ourselves because we see them in TV and film. And so the more you have authentic portrayal of people with disabilities in film and TV, the more they become part of our lives and more normalized. And I also realized a generational thing happening where younger people who may have gone to school with people with disabilities are more used to it, and it's like not a big deal to have diversity in their society, whereas older generations are more I guess they would say not as comfortable with it. And when we've really dug in and dealt with a lot of the studios, I think there is a perception that people with disabilities can't really authentically portray disability. But, we used to have that attitude with African Americans, Hispanic, and American Indians, and that has really changed very quickly in Hollywood. So, we've worked with the Oscars, we've worked with the Sundance Film, Institute, some of the leading actors and studios. So we've made, a great deal of progress, but there's still a lot of progress to be made.
Mm-hmm. I, on a silly sort of tangential note, this weekend I happened to watch the Lady Gaga documentary, and there's this moment in there where she talks about creating this album, Joanne, that came out, and that Joanne is sort of a tribute to her aunt who was 19 and sort of had lupus. And there's this moment in there where Lady Gaga is talking to her grandmother, sort of learning more about Joanne's story. And her grandmother was like, she had lupus, and the doctor said that we needed to amputate her hands, Joanne's hands. And the grandmother said something along the lines of like, well, she's an artist and I can't take her hands away. And sort of ultimately then Joanne passed sort of as complications with lupus. It's, not sure whether or not the hands, had they been amputated, would she be saved? It doesn't know, it's irrelevant. And just knowing that that's a very real thing. And that this sort of following that narrative of that, this person with a disability, that's a life unwanted to live. And that if we're not portraying them correctly in our medias, then we're sort of supporting all of these stigmas that exist. And just like how hard that hit me, because I have friends who have hands that have been amputated as a result of lupus, and knowing that these are really real themes and concepts, and just wanting to make sure that that really fuels the work that both I and Nikki, and I think that we all want to do, is to help create a better world where people can feel that they can still exist on this planet regardless of what their bodies look like or function like.
So what I've experienced with people that we work with, whether they be athletes or whether they be models or actors, is that there's a lot of pride in disability these days, and there's people are not staying silent. I mean, a lot of that has to do with social media and speaking out and working with other people and raising the voice. But I think that the disability activism is being heard. I know that it's being heard in Hollywood. I know that for a long time, when you would talk about diversity in Hollywood, you'd talk about race, you would talk about sexual orientation or sex, but I think disability is now becoming part of the conversation. I mean, Hollywood is a very complex place with a lot of different players, and there are some real strong advocates and some that are not so much. But I think that, society in general is making a great deal of progress. One thing I would say about the disability community is that, if the disability community was united, it's about 20% of the population, and it would be the largest minority group in the world and probably the most powerful minority group in the world. One of the drawbacks in the disability community is that we tend to group ourselves according to disability. Like, I deal with anxiety, or someone else deals with depression, or an amputation, or cerebral palsy, or Down syndrome, or autism, or whatever. And the community has a hard time banding together. And so we've never defined disability as an organization. And one of the reasons that we've never defined disability is because we believe that the community is much more powerful when we're united.
I love that. And you're hitting on something that Sarah and I have spent a lot of time heartaching about. And it's interesting because a lot of people, Sarah and I, of course, are amputees specifically. So we are very involved specifically in, like what you just said, the amputee community. And there is an extreme divide between people who are just, yes, I'm an amputee and I'm proud only to be amputee, versus I've crossed this bridge into disability pride and I'm a part of this larger community and larger group. And it's really fighting all of this word stigma that we keep coming back to. There's so much stigma around that word that to get people kind of cross into this idea that you're a part of this larger community is really challenging. But slowly, I think we're starting to really have those conversations and pull people over the bridge, hopefully anyway. I'm wondering, we're talking about white papers, we're talking about gathering data, and I'm wondering just generally if you could talk about why that kind of data collection, why is that important, and why should we be writing these things and collecting this data?
Well, first of all, I'd like to, just to step back for a second, because, when you talk about the disability community not really being united, I think that a lot of that has to do with organizations that are set up for specific disability and fund from that community. But I'll give a shout out to a movie that premiered when we were a sponsor of the Sundance Film Festival, which is one of the more prestigious independent film festivals. And they debuted on opening night a film called Crip Camp, which I don't know if you've seen, but you go back into the 70s where people with all sorts of different disabilities were going to this camp. And what grew out of that as they stayed in contact through the years is they really became the leaders of the disability rights movement. And you're talking about people with very varying disabilities. So, I mean, I think it's possible. I think when the community, when the individuals rise above the organizations, I think, that's when that will happen. I think data is very important when it sort of shows the community by shocking the community of like, this is what the situation is, or it provides the community incentive to act differently. So I'll give you an example. One of our most quoted white papers has to do with first responders, police, fire, EMTs. And the takeaway from that was that more police and firefighters die by suicide than in the line of duty. Now, unfortunately, in America, every single week, a policeman or a fireman commits suicide. And so, that's a data point that sort of shocks people. It only shocks the community. And why is that, so prevalent? Because there's a tremendous amount of stigma that if you're a firefighter or a police officer and you come out and you say, listen, I'm depressed and I'm having, suicidal thoughts, they're going to take away your weapon. They're going to suspend your job. You may not get that job back. But by reducing the stigma, and we've not only, produced the data, but, worked with New York City Police Department, Boston Police Department, and, been in contact with police departments from all over the country, that starts to change attitudes. That starts, police chiefs saying, okay, I'm going to get my officers the help they need, and I'm not going to fire them because they're having, these feelings. Getting back to Hollywood, we started to do a number of white papers saying, listen, this is how bad you are. 95% of the roles that you show playing disability are not played by disability. And, we did a number of white papers and criticism of movies in that vein. And then we turned around and produced a white paper, that we commissioned a research firm to look into that did some polling. And what it showed is that most Americans would prefer to see authentic representation of disability in film and TV. And it showed the studios how much money they would make by doing that. So, that's another way of saying, listen, it's not only the stick, but here's the carrot. Here's how much money you can make by sort of, changing. And by the way, you wouldn't go see a film today where you'd see an African-American played by someone who wasn't an African-American, or American Indian played by someone that's not an American Indian. But you used to typically see shows like that and see characters like that. So I think that in time, whether it's in 5 years or 10 years or 20 years, you will see people with disabilities playing disability on film. It really takes not only a change in society and for the public to say, this is what I want to see, but also take some leadership in the people that are making the films. And there are leaders out there. There are people like John Krasinski, who made A Quiet Place, who wanted his daughter played by someone who was deaf. It was a deaf character. Millicent Simmons played it. A show like Edgar Wright, who's a director who produced Baby Driver, in which he wanted the father to be played by a deaf character, C.J. Jones. So there are those leaders in the disability community. We just honored, we do an honor every year in my dad's memory. We give out $100,000 to an individual who's really been an advocate for disability rights. So we've given it out to Marlee Matlin, who was the first actress to win an Oscar for playing a disability. She herself is deaf. Senator Tom Harkin, who was one of the authors of the Americans with Disabilities Act. And this year we gave it out to the Farley brothers, who are directors and have done comedies like Dumb and Dumber, Something About Mary, Shallow Hal. And they really have made an effort to put people with disabilities in their films. And so it was like the last event before COVID-19 in March that we put an event together in LA, but you had people, like Larry David and Ted Danson and, major stars, come out, and people from the studios. So it's starting to have, a ripple effect. I just think it's going to take a little bit longer.
So two things. First of all, Sarah and I, of course, have absolutely watched Crip Camp, and we've joined some of the post-webinars conversations that have happened, and it made both of us cry multiple times. We are so proud and thankful that footage was saved and collected and then actually made into something that our generation and the generations that come can actually watch and feel directly connected to that pride and to see how much of a badass Judy is. So we are all about that. And I think the other thing that I want to say also as a comment, not a question, but just how excited it gets for me to hear how methodically and thoughtfully the foundation actually approaches these topics and the care that it gives in doing the research, in finding the right people, in connecting into the community, and doing things in a smart and right way. So thank you is the comment that I have to say.
Well, thank you for that. But I'd also say, we have very little to lose. So first of all, as a foundation, we're not raising money. So I don't have to be concerned that I'm going to say the wrong thing or put out a press release and people are going to get upset because I don't have that constituency. The other thing in terms of, Hollywood or any other community where we're critical, we don't have anything to lose in that community. There's a lot of people who are activists, but they're working actors and they don't want to be blackballed by the community. So we're able to really, speak out in those terms. And we're always trying to be as inclusive as possible. So, any actor with or without a disability that wants to join our cause, we've been very open, and, we have an open letter to the studios that we've had, most of the major stars sign calling for authentic representation of disability. But we've worked in so many different fields. I know we're talking a lot about Hollywood right now, but, many different fields. And the other thing I would just like to say is that, just so that your audience understands, what is a foundation? A foundation is, especially a family foundation, is a family that's decided to give away funds and they work on an issue. Our issue happens to be disability rights. We take a very progressive view of disability rights. So we're looking, to promote the people working in the community, living in the community, being, full members of the community. We're not people that support institutionalization or segregation or sheltered workshops. But the other thing is that, we are a family. Now, some of us may have disabilities. Certainly members of our staff have disabilities, and our advisory council are made up of people with disabilities. But I'm very cognizant of the fact. So several years ago, we founded a group called Link 20. Link 20 is a group of activists. It started in Israel. We have an office in Israel, but expanded to the United States, of activists with and without disabilities. And they, what we're trying to do is provide resources to help them become better activists. So provide the training. We do a graduate program at MIT for people with disabilities on social activism. But they've had some real strong wins that weren't our wins. They were the wins of Link 20. And again, why Link 20? 20% of the population has a disability. We're linking them together with general society. But for example, baseball for over 100 years, Major League Baseball had the term the disabled list. And so they wrote to Major League Baseball saying, this term is offensive to us. We are people with disabilities. And automatically baseball changed the term to the injured list. And you're talking about a sport that more Americans watch than any other sport. Mm-hmm. They had some of our activists in Link 20 are Paralympians, and you did not have equal pay for winning medals for Olympians and Paralympians. And so they petitioned the U.S. Olympic Committee, and finally they won. So the Paralympians are now paid in parity with Olympians. So they've had some great, wins. They've challenged airports on being more accessible for people with disabilities. So I think that that's a win. And by the way, as we go away as a foundation in however long, that may be, we want to be able to help others become, better activists. Mm-hmm. And I mean, some people don't need Judy Heumann is someone that I've known for a long time. I think Judy was born an activist and continues, to be an activist. But some people need to be, given the resources to become better activists. And, I think that that's a big, something I'm very proud of.
I'm wondering, can you share a little bit about how the Family Foundation kind of found the disability community and settled on really working within this community?
So I think for us, it happened by accident, but, nothing in life is really by accident. So our first major grant was to improve the school system in Boston to make it accessible for children with disabilities. And then when I was living in Israel, I had the ability to form a major partnership with the government of Israel to change policy in Israel to make it more inclusive for people with disabilities. And then I guess I decided to pursue this strategy of going narrow and deep and focusing on the issue of disability. And then as I met more people, with disabilities and got further into the issue, I realized that, there was an added value for us. There was an added value because I saw so many organizations focused on singular disabilities, and for us to be a more broad-based, organization. And then, for me, the advocacy, I think, came before. And so that's an added value because most foundations, they may support advocacy by funding other organizations, but we sort of did it on our own. And I think that was because it sort of comes naturally to me. And I saw this as a civil rights issue. I mean, I was always interested from a very young age and did my college thesis on the civil rights movement in the United States. And this is sort of one of the last civil rights movements. And so I think that that's really why we got very deeply, involved in the issue. And it continues to be something that's, very satisfying because there's so many parts of society that needs to be changed.
So many left.
The other thing I would just add to that is that, all of us are connected to the issue. After we got involved, my nephew was born with autism. My dad developed a condition called alpha-1 antitrypsin, where he generally lost his lung capacity and passed away, and he, became disabled. And there's someone, I can't remember who said it to me, but, all of us, if we live long enough, may develop a disability. So it's the one minority group that we will all probably someday join.
It is. And also when we make things inclusive and welcoming for us or for people with disabilities, then we make it accessible for all of us. So it's like this is good for all of us at any point in time too. And I really like that component. I'm also thinking that, so we talked about the white papers, we talked about the funding of different programs. Can you speak a little bit more on other things that the foundation does in sort of partnerships with programs and sort of what that component looks like?
So I want to get back to one thing you said about benefits for people with disabilities benefit all of us. So I remember being involved in Israel where they were first putting in curb cuts, and curb cuts were put in for, for people in wheelchairs. But, I was living there with young children, with bicycles and baby carriages. And so a lot of, as we make society more accessible, it does affect more than just the disability community. I mean, I think we've always taken an approach in terms of our funding of this is our issue, this is what we would like to do, and then approach the organizations that we want to work with that we think are impactful. Mm-hmm. So we've always taken the approach of we don't take unsolicited proposals. We go out and we look for the organizations that we want to fund. And, we've worked in housing, to oppose institutionalization of segregated housing, to independent living. We've worked on the issue of employment. And, a lot of employment programs are focused on people with disabilities and getting them the job, but we were really focused on employers and changing attitudes of employers of hiring people with disabilities. Of course, education, making education accessible to all and not segregated education. I mean, I can tell you in terms of philanthropy, we have butted heads with other organizations and other philanthropists that still are in the mode of segregated housing. And I've always, as a parent, when I deal with other parents, I've always said, listen, I'm not your judge. You can raise your children the way you want. You think often the argument for segregation is it's safer. I'm afraid for my child and, they should be in segregated education, segregated housing. I've always seen disability as part of the human condition, and that, a person with a disability, just like anyone, wants to have everything that anyone else in society would have. Live in your own place with a person of your own choosing, have a job, participate in the community, be able to access transportation. They're all sort of basic human needs that anyone would want. So, yeah, I think that's how we've approached our philanthropy.
Which is wonderful. I wanted to speak on one of your programs. When I was looking through the list of different organizations, I saw that Project Bind was on there, which is with the Boys and Girls Club of Dorchester. And when I was in my occupational therapy program at Boston University, my first semester, we got assigned to a program where we did our level 1 field works is where it's called. So we're sort of seeing what occupational therapy looks like in the field. And mine was at Project Bind. So I spent a semester there with another student in my class, and it was teaching an inclusive dance program. So it was incorporating both people that had a disability and people and kids that did not have a disability into this hip hop dance classroom. And it was just really important because these were individuals that do sometimes spend part of their day segregated. And perhaps, so it was just really important to have them both together. And so that everyone was learning these dance moves together. And then also everyone was learning about each other, which is just a really beautiful and magical program. And then we got a dance party at the end with a pizza, and it was just really lovely. So it made my heart really happy when I saw that was a program that I had also contributed to for, a tiny part of my life.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think that, everything that we've supported throughout the years have been inclusive. I mean, we would, and we've told organizations, we're not going to support programs that are just for people with disabilities. There has to be an inclusive element to that. And, part of the going, I guess you're looking to change the attitudes as much as the children who are able-bodied as the children, who have disability, because what we found, I'll never forget, we did this program in Jerusalem, and it just happened. It was in a city square, and I had gone into a store to buy something, and the cashier said to me, she's like, I want you to know that I had a similar program. She was not someone with a disability, but she said, I had a similar program when I was young, and it forever changed my attitude towards people with disabilities. And I think especially when you work with younger people, and and they're introduced to disability, it's no big deal. It's not like, but most of us are afraid of the other. So the more that you have inclusion, the more that you break down these stereotypes. I mean, I can always tell when I walk into a meeting and there's a younger person there and I'm talking about this and they're nodding their head, an older person, who just doesn't get it. But, one of the things that Judy Heumann will talk to you about, or, someone who's really, lived this experience, is that, people with disabilities used to be institutionalized. And we went from institutionalization to segregation to now, full inclusion in the community. But there's still a lot of people who grew up with their brothers and their sisters and their cousins being institutionalized or segregated and not seeing them. In fact, one of the most famous cases is President Kennedy's sister, Rosemary, who had some form of an intellectual disability. Her father had a lobotomy performed on her, and she was sent away to an institution in Wisconsin and was not seen for decades by the family until Eunice Shriver, who is Tim Shriver, Anthony Shriver's mother, and she formed Special Olympics, and then they formed Best Buddies. But, the idea that this is my sister and she deserves to be part of, our society, and people with disabilities deserve to be part of our society. And even organizations that started out as somewhat segregationist, like we're going to help children with disabilities, have now completely transformed to be very inclusive organizations. So, I think the history plays a big part in how people see it.
Definitely. I want to be mindful of time and respectful to you, but kind of before I ask the what's next for Ruderman question, I'm wondering if you can talk to us a little bit about what the foundation is thinking about and talking about and doing specifically in a time of COVID-19.
So what we did is a couple of what we called sort of immediate responses. So as I said, we operate in Israel, we operate in the United States. In Israel, we work with the major public television to make their news broadcasts accessible for all people with disabilities. So whether it is giving the news in a very slow spoken manner or with sign language or captions, at a time when a lot of people are going through a lot of fear, that was a way to reach all sectors of the population. In Boston, I'm always interested in some sort of leadership aspect, some sort of way of doing something that not everyone else is doing. So when COVID-19 hit, there was a lot of money put towards it, but not with a lot of direction. So we worked with Massachusetts General Hospital, which is one of the biggest hospitals in the Boston area, to give them a grant for doctors, nurses, and medical personnel to get the help they need for mental health issues. Because, we live this life and we're segregated, we're living in our houses and so forth, in our apartments, and we're isolated, but so many people that we know are going to work every day. And they're in very stressful situations. In fact, we had a very sad case a couple days ago of a doctor in Manhattan who went home and committed suicide because of the horror that she just couldn't deal with. Some people, doctors and nurses, are living in the hospital. They're coming home. They're afraid of infecting their wives or partners or children. So that was one thing that we did. We also gave a grant to the Boston Police Department because they're also showing up to situations where, potentially putting themselves at risk. And then our local community, we gave a grant for emergency response. But then the other thing that we did, because for me, I'm thinking in terms of advocacy, what's the biggest issue out there? And what I saw as an issue is a person with a disability getting COVID-19, going to the hospital, if they have an intellectual disability or they're already in a compromised situation, the hospital discounting their life. So we reached out to some medical ethicists at University of Pennsylvania and produced a white paper, which basically called for a process of having a committee with representing the disability community, caretakers, nurses and doctors, to focus on and not discounting the lives of people with disabilities because of the situation that they're in before they arrive in the hospital. And we, there was some success. We spoke out. We weren't the only ones, but, Alabama had some guidelines where they asked to discount the lives of people with disabilities. We spoke out against that, and they rescinded that. In Israel, they put out the Ministry of Health put out a statement saying, people with disabilities come third on the list. And we activated Link 20 in Israel, and they spoke out about that, and that was also rescinded. But so I think that this white paper has gotten some traction and will continue to get some traction. I think that we're going to face some issues as we come out of this. Mm-hmm. I saw something today that half of the deaths in America have come out of nursing homes or segregated facilities. So maybe as a society, we say these are not the best places to house people in compromised situations. And if they have to be, maybe we put the guidelines in place before that they're not put at risk, because that's really where we've seen a lot of deaths. And in Israel, we've been active for many, many years in moving people from segregated housing into their own apartments. And not only is that probably what they want, but it's also cheaper. It's less expensive for the government to support them in these situations than in segregated housing. So maybe that's something that will come out of this as an initial phase. But I personally, I don't think we're going to pop out of this. I think that, this is going to go on for a while, and there's going to be a lot of different ramifications that we just don't know about. And one thing as a philanthropic organization is I've never believed in putting everything and jumping into the issue, right away. You have to wait and see how it plays out, because things will happen that we don't even know will happen.
Mm-hmm. Agreed, but thank you so much already for the work and the funds that have gone out specifically to support. It's been interesting following the conversation online in the disability community, because there's been, of course, a ton of conversation around the conversation of where are we placed in an order, a pecking order, if it comes down to that. But then there's been a little bit of a we told you so tone when it comes to specifically talking about a working from home setup, right? We were talking about earlier the 70% unemployment within the disability community. And so much of that is the barrier of actually maybe physically getting to work or needing to be at home for whatever reason. And now we're experiencing that full on. So I'm hoping that is a good twist that comes out of this, that work will be a little bit more, accessible to our community here.
Yeah, I think that, for us as an organization, since we moved, I think in early March to working from home, and we're all over the country and all over the world, it hasn't slowed us down at all. I think, we're still just as busy. And I'm on an organization called the National Organization of Disability, which focuses on employment. And this is sort of making the case for them that you don't have to show up at a physical place in order to be productive. In fact, when we were talking about the nursing homes, I read something just before coming on this podcast that if we all go and return to work, we're putting ourselves sort of in the same type of situation, being very close to each other. And so maybe, we go on for a while, and this will certainly benefit people with disabilities, because a lot of work can be done from your home. Yeah.
So will you close us out by sharing a little bit, how do we find Ruderman Foundation if we're looking to get involved or help out? How do we do that? And maybe a little bit about what we can look forward to, maybe work coming down the pipeline?
Well, you can find us on our website at rudermanfoundation.org. We're on Twitter. I mean, I'm personally very accessible on Twitter. I can't deal with every request, but I believe, and I've written about this in the past, that philanthropy should be very transparent, and you should be in touch with people who are in the field. I think what's next for us, I'm not sure. We still have a lot of work in Hollywood that we have not put out yet, but we're waiting until this situation subsides to put it out. I think we will continue to make some progress there. As far as COVID-19, I mean, I think that white papers that are able to go beyond the disability community and are able to get general society to start thinking differently. That's the direction that I'm interested in going. I mean, it's like we work with the disability community and are part of the disability community. But when we engage in a project, I'm always looking to go beyond the community to reach the hearts and minds of people who are not in the community. Now, having said that, our society is set up to look at disability as an issue of charity. And, these are people who are less fortunate, and they need our help, and they need our money and our support. And that's a mindset that everything that we're trying to do is try to change that mindset. And the champions beyond people with disabilities are always people in industry and in entertainment and in athletics that have a personal connection. They have a child, they themselves have a disability, they have a sibling with a disability. We have to move beyond that. We have to move to people who just don't have that personal connection right away and realize that this is a civil rights issue. And if I would see one success, it's the banding of the disability community together. So, people are not focused on their single disability.
Yes, that's incredible. I'm excited to live in that world. I hope it comes soon. I'm ready to live in that world. We appreciate it. We appreciate very much the work that you're doing and the organizations that you're supporting and all of the research and paperwork that you're putting out, because that is what's going to create this better society that we all know needs to happen, or we know that needs to happen. But as far as being able to communicate that to everyone else and sort of get them on their hearts and minds too, I really love that and appreciate that, and really want to thank you for the work that you're doing, because we need it. Our world needs it. Thank you for spending part of your day with us. We want to give thanks to our network, Public House Media, and for our intro beats, Jason Barnes with Cybernetics. For our logo art, we want to remember Patrice. You can find his work at nomorepersons.com.
Be sure to follow Disarming Disability on Facebook and Instagram. And lastly, be sure to check out our website, disarmingdisability.com, where you can find all 13 episodes of Season 1, links to resources, transcriptions, and discussion questions for each episode. And check out our blog, where we feature amazing disability advocates.